Hi guys, and welcome back to another episode of Homegrown Musician. So as you're watching this video, I'm going to assume that you're a musician who enjoys writing their own music and possibly recording some of it at home. Now as an active composer myself, I can tell you one of the worst feelings in the world is getting writer's block. So in today's video, I'll be sharing with you 5 tips that I personally use to help myself get over writer's block. So my first tip is to try composing for an instrument that you don't normally play. So by trade, I'm actually an electric guitarist, as you've probably seen in some of my other videos. I also play the tenor horn, which is like a shrunken down tuba, but that's besides the point. If I'm going to compose something, I'll definitely reach for my electric guitar. Obviously, having an instrument that you're good at has advantages. It means that I can quickly come up with ideas, I'm very familiar with the layout of the guitar, and how to make it sound good. The disadvantage of this is because I'm always playing the guitar, I tend to practice the same sort of things, which is bad practice on my part, but it runs the risk of my music sounding a bit familiar. If I'm always using the same chords, the same chord sequences, and the same licks, my music might get a bit boring. So to overcome this writer's block on the guitar, every so often I'll write a piece of music for an instrument or instrumentation that I just am not familiar with whatsoever. So a couple of years ago, for example, I wrote a piece of music for Pots and Pans Gamelan, where I literally used pots and pans, and it's actually one of the pieces that I'm most proud of. It doesn't even have to be as drastic as changing your instrument entirely. With computers, we can add effects in post, and all of a sudden this opens up a massive world of possibilities. If you're using, say for example, a fuzz style effect, you're more likely to play something like this. Whereas if you're using something more ambient like a delay or reverb, you'll probably start composing something like this. So even just by changing the tone or by using different effects, it will inspire different musical ideas that you probably wouldn't have thought of otherwise. So tip number 2 is writing out your key chords. So obviously, one of the most fun things about writing music is the spontaneous nature of it. There's nothing better than picking up your instrument, just playing anything, something random, and then seeing what you can create in the moment. It's actually really good fun. However, sometimes this actually leads us into a few problems and we'll hit a block in the road. So one of the ways that I like to get over this, particularly when I was first starting out and my grasp of harmony wasn't as strong, is to actually visualize the harmony. So think about the notes that we've used, the chords that we're using, and write them out on a piece of paper. So to do this, figure out which key you're in. Are you in a major key, a minor key, maybe even something modal? If you don't know what that is, just give it a quick Google. Now once you've figured out what key you're in, write out your scale and build a triad on each of the scale degrees, just like I showed you a few videos ago in my episode about chords, which I'll link to above or down below. So this is a really useful technique because we have a massive list of chords that we can just drop in and out of our song to see how they sound. If you drop one in and you like it, great. If you don't, just swap it out with another one of the chords from the list. So it's really great for generating ideas quickly, because I find at least once I've got the harmony down, everything else just falls into place. So tip number 3, stealing ideas from your favourite bands. So if you're ever in writer's block, a really good tip is to go on Spotify, create a playlist of all your favourite music, put it together and give it a listen. Now I'm not saying to listen idly while scrolling through Instagram or, watching Homegrown Musician videos, maybe do that, but you have to sit there and listen analytically. So I'll be sitting there with my guitar in hand trying to figure out what I like about the music. Is it the cool chords that they use? Is it the really funky bass line? Is it the ripping guitar solo? You have to sit there and listen analytically and then take inspiration from that and put it into your own music. Now I'm not saying go and steal somebody else's work, because that'll just land you a lawsuit. But there's a difference between copying and pasting somebody else's melody and taking some subtle inspiration and putting it into your own work, and it's actually a really good way of generating ideas. So my next tip, leave your riff alone, try changing the harmony instead. So that's actually quite a lot of musical jargon for what is effectively a really simple concept. So in pop music, we have what's known as the hook or the riff, which is basically just a short musical idea or phrase that keeps coming back and it really grabs the listener's attention. So think the opening melody to Seven Nation Army, that is a classic hook. Now in classical music, this exact same concept is known as the motif. So the words hook, riff and motif are pretty interchangeable. Now, when we're writing the hooks for our songs, everybody always tries to make them really complicated and musically interesting so we grab the listener's attention. Now, what I'm going to propose to you is if you've got a bit of writer's block, do the complete opposite. Write a really simple hook that's maybe a few notes long, maybe a couple bars at max, and then instead of making the hook more complicated, loop that over the top whilst you change the harmony going on underneath. Now, to help explain this, I've written a short piece that will hopefully really clearly demonstrate what I'm talking about. So as you can see, we get a lot of mileage out of this really simple musical idea just by changing the underlying harmony. So if you've ever got some writer's block, try doing that and it might help you get more out of your music. So tip number 5, using samples and field recordings in your music. So what is sampling in music? So according to Google, sampling is the technique of digitally encoding music or sound and reusing it as part of a composition or recording. So that's actually a really fancy way of saying taking a pre-existing recording and using it in your own composition. So a really famous example of sampling is Vanilla Ice's Ice Ice Baby, where they use the bass line from Queen and they sample that. One of my personal favourite examples of sampling is Power by Kanye West, and that really big distorted vocal right before the chorus is actually a sample from King Crimson's 21st Century Schizoid Man, which was recorded over 40 years before Power came out. So one of the great things about sampling is most of the hard work's actually been done. The core musical idea has been written and recorded, and you just need to take it somewhere else creatively. So this is a really useful technique, especially if you're struggling with writer's block. So another really interesting use of samples can be seen in the case of found sounds or field recordings. So as the name implies, found sounds is taking real world sounds such as knocking on a door or creaking a rusty gate and using them in your music. So I've actually done a fair bit of this myself, and at the end of last year I wrote a piece called The Emerald Isle, which was made pretty much entirely out of samples that I recorded with my field recorder when I was on holiday in Belfast. So I'll just play a little bit of that now, and bear in mind that almost everything in the song is sampled except for the bass line, which is my Chord synth, and the drums, which are made using Logic's Ultrabeat. So that actually brings us to the end of today's video. Hopefully these tips have been useful to you, and you might actually use some of them if you get a little bit of writer's block. If you have some of your own tips, leave them in the comment section below, and please remember to like, share and subscribe as it would massively help the channel.